On the morning of July 4th, 2026, 18-year-old Nolan Wells left home expecting nothing more than a day on the water with friends. It was Independence Day, and like thousands of other young people across Mississippi, Nolan planned to celebrate the holiday on Horn Island, a remote barrier island sitting roughly 10 miles off the Gulf Coast. The island is beautiful, quiet, and isolated. There are no neighborhoods, no businesses, and very little cell service. Once the boats leave, you're surrounded by miles of open water. To Nolan's family, it sounded like a harmless summer outing. Hours later, it would become the beginning of a mystery that still has no clear ending. Friends say Nolan traveled to Horn Island aboard a private boat with several people to celebrate the holiday. Throughout the afternoon, the group spent time on the island like many others enjoying the long weekend. Then something happened. Exactly what happened during those final hours remains one of the biggest unanswered questions in the entire investigation. By that evening, the boat that had carried Nolan to the island returned to shore. Nolan wasn't on it. When his family realized he hadn't come home, panic set in almost immediately. This wasn't like him. According to those closest to him, Nolan was responsible, respectful, and stayed in regular contact with his family. His mother later described him as the type of son who always checked in. If he was running late, she usually knew why. This time, there was only silence. His family reported him missing that same night. At first, they hoped there had been some misunderstanding. Maybe another boat had picked him up. Maybe his phone had died. Maybe he had simply become separated from the group. But as the hours passed, those hopes slowly disappeared. Search crews quickly began looking across the waters surrounding Horn Island. The Coast Guard joined the effort. Local law enforcement coordinated search operations. Helicopters flew overhead, while boats combed the shoreline below. But some of the most determined searchers weren't wearing uniforms. Nolan's own father joined the search personally. So did his football coach. Rather than waiting on shore for updates, they spent long hours searching the island and surrounding waters themselves, refusing to believe the worst until every possibility had been exhausted. For every parent watching, it was heartbreaking. No father ever expects to search the ocean for his own son. 2 days later, on July 6th, searchers made a discovery that changed everything. Nolan Wells' body was found floating near the northwestern side of Horn Island. The search was over. The investigation had only just begun. Almost immediately, questions began spreading far faster than answers. How had Nolan become separated from everyone else? Why had he remained on the island after the others left? What happened during those missing hours? And perhaps the question that has haunted his family the most: why didn't anyone realize he had been left behind? Investigators carefully secured the area where Nolan was found. Evidence collection began. Witnesses were contacted. Phones would eventually become a major focus of the investigation. Photos, videos, messages, every digital record from July 4th suddenly carried new importance. Authorities urged anyone who had been on Horn Island that day to preserve any original photos or videos they had taken. Not edited clips, not screenshots, original files. Investigators believed even a seemingly ordinary photo might help establish who was where and when. Sometimes the smallest detail becomes a piece that changes an entire investigation. As news of Nolan's death spread, so did public attention. The case quickly expanded beyond Mississippi. Social media filled with theories. Some claimed foul play. Others believed it had been a tragic accident. Videos appeared claiming insider information. Anonymous posts accused people by name. Speculation spread faster than verified facts. But investigators remained noticeably careful. They refused to announce conclusions before the evidence supported them. At that stage, officials had not released an official cause of death. They had not identified suspects. They had not announced arrests. Instead, they repeatedly described the investigation using 3 simple words: active, ongoing, unfinished. Those words frustrated many people looking for immediate answers. But experienced investigators understand something the public often doesn't. The loudest theory is rarely the strongest evidence. As the investigation continued, Nolan's family began speaking publicly. Their grief was impossible to hide. His mother described a son who loved football, loved his family, and had his entire future ahead of him. His coaches remembered him as respectful and hardworking. Friends described someone who treated people with kindness and humility. To those who knew him, Nolan wasn't simply another headline. He was a young man with dreams that would never be realized. That reality became increasingly difficult to ignore as media coverage intensified. Every update brought renewed attention. Every rumor created more confusion. And every unanswered question deepened the family's pain. Meanwhile, investigators quietly continued building a timeline. Who saw Nolan last? When exactly was he separated from the group? What happened during those final hours before he disappeared? Those answers wouldn't come easily. Witness interviews had only begun. Digital evidence still needed examination. Autopsy results remained pending. Every step required patience. But patience is often the hardest thing to ask from a grieving family. Then another development changed the direction of the investigation. Federal authorities officially joined the case. To many people following the story online, that announcement sounded dramatic. Some immediately assumed it meant investigators had uncovered evidence of murder. Others believed arrests were imminent. But the truth was far more complicated. Federal involvement didn't necessarily mean investigators had solved the mystery. It meant the investigation had entered a new phase, one involving digital evidence, jurisdictional questions, and a growing number of unanswered leads. Exactly why federal agents became involved, and what investigators were really looking for, would soon become the next major chapter in Nolan Wells' story. As the days passed, public interest in Nolan Wells' death only intensified. Questions multiplied. Rumors exploded across social media. Everyone seemed convinced they already knew what had happened, but investigators remained unusually quiet. Then came an announcement that instantly changed the conversation. Federal investigators had officially joined the case. For many people following the story online, those words sounded like confirmation that something far more sinister had occurred. Comments flooded social media almost immediately. Someone's about to be arrested. This proves it wasn't an accident. The FBI only gets involved in murder cases. But investigators never said any of those things. In fact, officials urged the public not to jump to conclusions. Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter confirmed that federal authorities were now assisting his department with portions of the investigation. Their primary role? Reviewing digital evidence. That meant examining cell phones, text messages, photos, videos, location records, social media activity, and any electronic evidence connected to the events of July 4th. In today's world, a phone often tells investigators more than a witness can. A single timestamp can confirm where someone was. Deleted messages can sometimes be recovered. Photos often contain hidden metadata, showing exactly when and where they were taken. Even videos recorded for only a few seconds may capture conversations or background details that become critically important later. Investigators weren't looking for dramatic revelations. They were looking for facts. Facts that couldn't forget. Facts that couldn't lie. But Sheriff Ledbetter also made another important point. Horn Island is federal property. Because of that, cooperation between local law enforcement and federal agencies is common whenever serious incidents occur there. That distinction mattered. Federal involvement did not automatically mean investigators believed a homicide had occurred. It did not mean local authorities had lost control of the investigation. And it certainly did not guarantee criminal charges. Instead, officials described it as a partnership designed to provide additional technical resources, while local investigators continued leading the case. It wasn't television. It was procedure. As investigators worked behind closed doors, another disturbing issue began emerging. People connected to Nolan's case started receiving threats. Some of the individuals who had been with Nolan that day reported receiving hateful messages online. Others described being harassed on social media. According to public statements, one local judge even revealed that members of her own family had received death threats after the case gained national attention. Suddenly, investigators weren't only trying to determine what had happened on Horn Island. They were also trying to protect people from becoming targets of online vigilantism. Federal authorities became involved in addressing threats that crossed state lines, a responsibility separate from determining Nolan's cause of death. It was another reminder of how quickly high-profile investigations can spiral beyond the original tragedy. Meanwhile, Nolan's family continued waiting. The official autopsy had not yet been released. Independent medical examinations were also underway. Weeks passed without investigators announcing an official cause or manner of death. For many people watching from the outside, the silence became frustrating. But experienced investigators know something many television dramas ignore. Good investigations are rarely fast. Witnesses must be interviewed separately, statements compared, digital evidence verified, physical evidence documented, every claim tested, every timeline reconstructed. One mistake made early can jeopardize an entire prosecution later. That is why investigators often move much slower than the public expects. Accuracy matters more than speed. Another significant development soon emerged. Officials confirmed that the case would eventually be presented before a grand jury once investigators completed their work. That announcement immediately fueled more speculation online. Many assumed it meant prosecutors already believed a crime had occurred. Legal experts quickly pointed out that wasn't necessarily true. In many jurisdictions, presenting unexplained deaths to a grand jury is standard procedure. A grand jury doesn't decide guilt. It determines whether sufficient evidence exists to move forward with criminal charges. Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes it isn't. The process itself proves nothing. It simply represents another step in determining the truth. Throughout the investigation, authorities repeatedly requested something very specific from the public: original photos, original videos, anything recorded on July 4th. Why originals? Because screenshots and reposted clips often lose valuable information. Original files preserve hidden data. The exact time an image was captured. Sometimes the GPS location. Sometimes even details about the device used to record it. Those invisible pieces of information can help investigators verify timelines with remarkable precision. A photograph that appears completely ordinary to the public may contain details investigators consider invaluable. That's why officials ask people not to edit or compress their files before submitting them. Every byte of information mattered. As investigators quietly examined digital evidence, they continued interviewing witnesses. Each interview served one purpose: reconstructing Nolan's final hours. Who last saw him? Where was he standing? What conversations took place? What happened after the group began preparing to leave? Every answer had to be compared against every other statement. Sometimes witnesses remember events differently. That doesn't automatically mean someone is lying. Human memory is imperfect, especially during stressful situations. Investigators understand that. That's why interviews are often repeated over weeks or even months. Consistency matters. Contradictions matter. Small details matter. Despite the growing public pressure, Sheriff Ledbetter continued delivering the same message. The investigation remained active. No arrests had been announced. No suspects had been publicly identified. No official cause of death had been released. The evidence simply wasn't ready. That frustrated many people following the case. But investigators refused to replace facts with assumptions. They understood something the internet often forgets. Once an accusation is made publicly, it can never truly be taken back, which is exactly why law enforcement remained measured in every public statement. Then, just as investigators thanked the public for submitting valuable tips, another report surfaced. According to several media outlets, a previously unknown witness had reportedly come forward with information connected to Nolan's final hours. The story spread rapidly across social media. Some claimed this witness had solved the mystery. Others insisted investigators already knew who was responsible. But there was one problem. Law enforcement had not officially confirmed any of it. Who was this witness? What exactly did they claim to know? And could their testimony finally answer the questions Nolan's family had been asking since July 4th? Or would it become just another rumor in a case already overwhelmed by speculation? Those questions would soon become the investigation's newest and perhaps most controversial chapter. By the time investigators entered the third week of the Nolan Wells investigation, the case had become much bigger than a missing person report. National media had picked it up. Millions of people were discussing it online. Every new headline seemed to generate hundreds of theories, thousands of comments, and countless videos claiming to have solved the mystery. Then another development caught everyone's attention. Reports began circulating that a new witness had come forward. According to several news outlets, this individual may have possessed information connected to Nolan's final hours on Horn Island. If true, it could become one of the most significant breakthroughs since Nolan's body was discovered. But there was one important detail many people overlooked. The witness had not been officially identified by law enforcement. No public statement confirmed exactly who they were. No official documents revealed what they allegedly saw, and investigators refused to discuss the reports publicly. That silence created the perfect environment for rumors to grow. Within hours, social media was flooded with claims. Anonymous accounts insisted the witness had exposed everything. Others claimed arrests were only days away. Names of private individuals began spreading online. Videos appeared presenting speculation as if it were established fact. But responsible investigators and responsible journalists understand something very important. A rumor repeated 1,000 times does not become evidence. Until investigators verify a witness's statement, compare it against physical evidence, and determine its credibility, it remains only one piece of a much larger puzzle. Sheriff John Ledbetter had already thanked members of the public for providing useful information during the investigation. He confirmed that tips from ordinary citizens had helped move the case forward. What he did not confirm was whether the reported new witness was responsible for those developments. That distinction mattered, because in high-profile cases, misinformation often travels much faster than the truth. Investigators continued doing what they had been doing since the beginning, interviewing witnesses, reviewing digital evidence, comparing timelines, waiting for forensic results. Every piece of information had to fit together logically. If one witness remembered something differently from everyone else, investigators had to determine why. Was it an honest mistake, a forgotten detail, or something more significant? Only evidence could answer that question. Not opinions, not online speculation. Evidence. One of the biggest challenges investigators faced was reconstructing Nolan's final timeline. What time did he arrive? Who spent time with him throughout the afternoon? When was he last seen? Who saw him after that? Every minute mattered. Phones became central to that effort. Messages, photos, videos, location records. Investigators request original files because digital evidence often reveals details invisible to the human eye. Metadata can establish when a photograph was taken. GPS information can sometimes reveal where. Deleted messages can occasionally be recovered. Together, those pieces help investigators build a timeline that is far more reliable than memory alone. At the same time, Nolan's family continued searching for answers of their own. They retained legal representation. An independent autopsy was requested. Family attorney Ben Crum confirmed that independent efforts would continue alongside the official investigation. For grieving families, this is not unusual. Many simply want reassurance that every possible avenue has been explored, especially when questions remain unanswered. The family's pain only grew as days turned into weeks. His mother publicly described Nolan as a son who always stayed in touch, someone who called home regularly, someone who had never given her reason to fear he would simply disappear. His parents also expressed their belief that Nolan would not have willingly remained behind on the island, nor, they said, would he have intentionally left his phone behind. Those statements reflected a family's heartbreak, not official investigative conclusions. Even so, they highlighted why so many questions remained. Meanwhile, prosecutors confirmed that once investigators completed their work, the case would be presented before a grand jury. Again, officials emphasized this was standard procedure for unexplained deaths. It was not proof of criminal conduct. It was not an indication that charges were imminent. It was simply another step in determining whether the available evidence justified further legal action. That process could still take time. Investigations involving multiple agencies, extensive digital evidence, witness interviews, and pending forensic reports rarely move quickly. As frustrating as that may be, investigators repeatedly stress that accuracy must come before speed. Perhaps the greatest lesson from the Nolan Wells case is how easily public perception can outpace confirmed facts. Within days of Nolan's disappearance, countless theories had already been accepted as truth by people online. Some insisted it had been an accident. Others were convinced foul play was involved. Still others claimed they knew exactly who was responsible. Yet investigators continued saying the same thing. The investigation remained active. The evidence was still being analyzed. Critical questions had not yet been answered. Those statements may not satisfy public curiosity, but they reflect the reality of responsible law enforcement. Real investigations are built one verified fact at a time, not one viral theory at a time. Today, several important questions remain unresolved. What exactly happened during Nolan's final hours on Horn Island? Why was he separated from the others? What will the digital evidence ultimately reveal? Will forensic findings answer the questions his family has been asking since July 4th? And will the reported witness provide investigators with information that changes the direction of the case, or simply confirm what they already know? Those answers remain in the hands of investigators. Until then, the public is left with only confirmed facts, unanswered questions, and a family still waiting for the truth. Nolan Wells was only 18 years old. He was remembered by coaches as a hard-working athlete, by friends as someone who treated others with kindness, by his family as a son with dreams, ambitions, and an entire future still ahead of him. Behind every headline, behind every online debate, behind every theory shared across social media, is a family whose life changed forever. As investigators continue examining evidence, interviewing witnesses, and waiting for forensic results, one thing remains certain. The people who love Nolan are still searching for answers. And until those answers are found, this case remains exactly what investigators have called it from the beginning: an active, ongoing investigation. Thank you for watching. If future official updates are released, we'll continue following this case carefully, separating confirmed facts from speculation, and reporting every development with the accuracy and respect that Nolan Wells and his family deserve.